Do you remember the last time you climbed into a treehouse? Was it a place of joy, laughter, and wonder? Or did you feel it? That strange unease as if something was watching just beyond the trees. That feeling you couldn't quite shake even as the sun set and the woods fell silent. That's where my story begins. But let me warn you, by the end of tonight, you may never look at treehouses the same way again. Treehouses are meant to be safe havens, escapes from reality, a child's paradise among the branches. But in the stories I'm about to tell you, these magical hideaways became the stage for some of the most harrowing, unforgettable nightmares. Shadows lurking just out of sight, whispers in the dead of night, and things that no one should ever encounter, waiting in the dark corners of the woods. These are true stories, and they happen to people just like me and you. Tonight, you'll hear about the shadow behind the leaves, the man in the woods, the whispering tree, and more. Each tale will pull you deeper into the darkness, and you'll feel what it's like to be truly alone, surrounded by silence, with nowhere to run. So before we begin, I need you to do something. Lock your doors, close your windows, and keep the lights on if you dare. Because once you hear these stories, the shadows in your own home might not feel so empty anymore. If you're brave enough, make sure to stay with me until the very end. And if you've ever had your own terrifying treehouse experience, I want to hear about it in the comments. Hit the like button, subscribe, and let's dive into the first story, if you're ready. Growing up, I thought a treehouse was the gateway to adventure, but I never imagined it could be the door to something I couldn't unknow. When I was a kid, nothing excited me more than the day my dad told me he was going to build a treehouse. It wasn't just any treehouse, it was a masterpiece, perched high in the biggest oak tree at the edge of our backyard, where the forest began. I remember watching him hammer the last nail, the way the golden sunlight filtered through the branches. It felt like magic. But looking back, I can't help but wonder, did we build that treehouse, or was something already waiting for us there? The first few weeks were perfect. I spent every afternoon up there, pretending it was a pirate ship, a secret clubhouse, anything my imagination could conjure. It was my sanctuary. But then, strange things started to happen. It began with small things. One morning, after a heavy storm, I found footprints in the mud beneath the treehouse. They weren't mine, and my dad brushed it off as a deer or maybe the neighbor's dog, but they looked human. Barefoot, too large to be mine and too small to be his. Then came the nights. I'd be lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I'd feel it, the sensation of being watched. I'd glance out the window toward the treehouse, and I swear I saw movement, like someone, or something, was shifting in the shadows of the branches. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I convinced myself it was nothing, just my overactive imagination. I grabbed a flashlight and snuck out, determined to prove to myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. But as I approached the treehouse, I heard it, a voice, low, almost a whisper, calling my name. It sounded exactly like my dad's voice, but he wasn't outside. He was asleep in the house. My stomach dropped, but curiosity, or maybe something else, drew me closer. I climbed the ladder slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The treehouse was pitch black inside, except for the weak beam of my flashlight, and then I saw it. A shadow, tall, impossibly tall, with glowing eyes that reflected the light back at me. It wasn't human, but it stood upright, staring at me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then it took a step forward. I screamed. I scrambled down the ladder, nearly falling, and sprinted back to the house. My parents found me shaking, unable to explain what I'd seen. When we went back the next morning, the treehouse was empty, but the wood inside was covered in claw marks, deep and jagged, as if something had tried to tear its way out or in. My dad wanted to repair it, but I begged him not to. I couldn't go near it after that. Eventually, we stopped using the treehouse altogether. It sat there rotting until it finally collapsed years later. And even then, I swear I felt it, that same watching presence, like it never really left. To this day, I don't know what was out there. All I know is I'll never set foot in a treehouse again. I didn't see him at first. I heard him, the crunch of dry leaves, the faint scrape of something against wood. But when I finally looked out from the treehouse, he was there, standing in the shadows. and I'll never forget the glint of the knife in his hand. When I was 16, the treehouse in our backyard became my escape. It wasn't like when I was a kid, pretending it was a fortress or pirate ship. No, this was different. I'd sneak up there to read, listen to music, or just get away from everything. It was my own little world, hidden from the chaos of being a teenager. But I never imagined it would become a place I'd fight to escape from. It started subtly. Late one night, I heard rustling outside while I was sitting in the treehouse. I told myself it was just a raccoon or maybe the wind. But the next morning, I found something strange. Cigarette butts scattered at the base of the tree. My family didn't smoke, and our closest neighbors lived too far away to casually wander onto our property. I shrugged it off, but then I noticed something else. Carvings. Small, crude symbols etched into the wooden supports of the treehouse. They hadn't been there before. At first, I thought they were just random scratches, but the more I looked, the more deliberate they seemed. They made my skin crawl. I mentioned it to my parents, but they laughed it off. Probably just some kids messing around, my dad said. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And then, the neighbor came by. He was an older man, someone who rarely came out of his house. He told my dad there had been an escaped convict in the area, someone dangerous. The police were looking, but he hadn't been caught yet. I remember the way my dad's face tightened as the neighbor described him. Tall, wiry, with hollow eyes. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. That night, I stayed in the treehouse longer than usual. I had my headphones on, trying to drown out my unease with music, but I kept hearing noises. The same rustling, faint but deliberate. I turned off my music and held my breath, straining to hear. That's when I saw it. Movement. A shadow flitting between the trees, just at the edge of the clearing. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would give me away. Before I could climb down, I heard it, the unmistakable scrape of metal against wood. It was coming from below the treehouse. I peered over the edge and froze. He was there, circling the base of the tree, dragging a knife against the trunk. He looked up suddenly, as if sensing me. I'll never forget his face. Sunken eyes, a twisted grin. I couldn't move. I was trapped. I knew I couldn't stay. I had to act. Gathering every ounce of courage, I waited until he circled to the other side of the tree. Then I jumped. I hit the ground hard, my ankle twisting painfully, but I didn't stop. I ran, sprinted toward the house, my lungs burning with every step. Behind me, I heard him shout, but I didn't dare look back. I made it inside, slamming the door and locking it behind me. My parents called the police, and when they arrived, they found evidence. Makeshift bedding, food wrappers, and more cigarette butts hidden under the treehouse. He'd been living there, watching me, waiting. I never understood why he didn't just break in. Maybe it was a game to him, a sick thrill in the chase. But one thing stayed with me, the sound of his knife scraping against the wood. Even now, years later, I hear it in my nightmares. The first time I heard my name whispered, I thought it was my imagination. By the time I saw the hand reaching for me, I realized the treehouse wasn't just old, it was haunted. Every summer, I'd stay at my grandparents' farm. It was a sprawling place, full of overgrown fields and towering trees that seemed to touch the sky. As a kid, it was magical, but as I got older, the magic faded, and something darker took its place. The treehouse was a part of that transition. I found it one afternoon while exploring the far edge of the property. It was hidden among gnarled branches, half collapsed and rotting. My grandparents never mentioned it, and I was immediately drawn to it, despite its decayed state. The ladder was weathered, but still sturdy enough to climb, so I did. Inside, the treehouse smelled of mildew and damp wood. Old toys and scraps of paper littered the floor like someone had abandoned it in a hurry. I felt a strange unease, like I was trespassing on something private. But what really caught my attention was the quiet. It was too quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop when I was up there. That's when I heard it. My name, spoken so softly it could have been mistaken for the wind. Just the breeze, I told myself, but deep down I knew better. The sound came from the corner of the treehouse where the shadows seemed unnaturally thick. I climbed down fast that day, telling myself I wouldn't go back, but the pull of that treehouse was irresistible. Something about it gnawed at my curiosity, so the next day I returned, and that's when things got stranger. An old diary was sitting in the corner where the whispers had come from. It wasn't there before. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting messy but legible. It belonged to a child, a boy who wrote about spending time in the treehouse. His entries seemed normal at first, but they quickly took a dark turn. He wrote about the tree whispering to him, calling his name, asking him to stay. His final entry read, "I think it's alive, and I think it wants me to stay forever." My blood ran cold. I slammed the diary shut, but the whispers grew louder, angrier. My name echoed from every corner of the treehouse. Then I saw it. A pale hand, small and skeletal, reaching out from the shadows. It clawed at the diary as if trying to take it back. I didn't think. I just ran. I scrambled down the ladder and sprinted back to the house, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I never told my grandparents what happened, but I never went near that treehouse again. Years later, I learned the truth. A boy had gone missing on the farm decades before. The police searched for weeks, but never found him. The last place he was seen? Near that tree. I still hear those whispers sometimes, in my dreams or when I'm alone in the quiet. It makes me wonder if the boy ever really left, or if he's still there, waiting for someone to stay forever. At first, we thought it was just animals. The missing food, the strange smells. It seemed like a harmless nuisance. But by the time we found the hatch beneath the treehouse, we realized the truth was far more terrifying than we could have imagined. It all started when my friends and I decided to get away from the city for a weekend. We rented a rural Airbnb, one of those picturesque properties with a cozy cabin, endless woods, and a treehouse in the backyard. The listing mentioned the treehouse like it was a charming feature, something nostalgic and fun. So naturally, we decided to sleep there for one of the nights. At first, it was perfect. We dragged our sleeping bags up the creaky ladder, laughing as the treehouse swayed gently with the wind. It was small but cozy, with a little window that overlooked the woods. We stayed up late, talking and stargazing, until we eventually drifted off to sleep. I woke up to the sound of movement. It was subtle, like a soft shuffling, just outside the treehouse. I sat up, peering through the window, but I didn't see anything. Probably a raccoon, I thought, and went back to sleep. But in the morning, things felt off. Food we'd packed for snacks was gone, not just moved, but completely missing. One of the blankets was crumpled in a corner, even though none of us remembered using it. And then there was the smell. It was faint but sour, like sweat and damp earth. We joked about it, blaming each other, but deep down, I felt unsettled. The second night, it got worse. I woke up again, this time to the sound of breathing. Low, raspy and close. My heart pounded as I lay still, listening. When I finally mustered the courage to look around, nothing seemed out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been in there with us. The next morning, we found scratches on the treehouse floor. Deep, jagged marks that hadn't been there before. One of my friends laughed nervously, saying it was probably just an animal trying to get in. But I wasn't so sure. The marks looked deliberate, almost like someone had been clawing their way inside. That night, none of us wanted to sleep in the treehouse, but we were too stubborn to admit we were scared. So we stayed. Around midnight, I woke up again, this time to a strange sound beneath the floor. It was faint, like scratching and shuffling, coming from directly below us. My stomach dropped as I realized the treehouse had a hatch, a trapdoor we hadn't noticed before. We opened it. Beneath the floor was a dugout space, like a makeshift cellar. The air was damp and rank, and my flashlight illuminated a small bed of old blankets, a few empty food wrappers, and a journal. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The first pages were mundane, filled with entries about the woods and the property. But then, the writing shifted. The journal described us. It detailed our arrival, our conversations, even the snacks we brought. The last entry made my blood run cold. It read, "They don't know I'm here yet, but I'll make my move soon." I dropped the journal and scrambled out of the treehouse, my friends right behind me. We didn't pack. We didn't even lock the cabin. We just got in the car and drove as fast as we could. The next day, we called the property owner and the police. When they investigated, they found clear signs that someone had been living under the treehouse for weeks. Whoever it was, they were gone, but the thought of how close we came to danger still haunts me. The treehouse seemed so innocent, so nostalgic, but now when I think of it, all I can picture is that journal and the feeling of being watched from the shadows. If you ever stay somewhere with a treehouse, check the floorboards. You never know what or who might be hiding underneath. You know that feeling when you realize you've made a terrible mistake? When something you thought was harmless turns out to be watching your every move? That's what happened when I bought the house with the treehouse. It was supposed to be a dream come true, a charming house on the edge of a quiet town, with a massive backyard and an old treehouse tucked into the branches of a giant oak. I imagined my kids playing in it, laughing, making memories. But from the moment we moved in, that treehouse felt wrong. At first, it was little things. Branches that seemed to shift in the wind even when the air was still, leaves rustling like whispers, and the way the treehouse seemed to loom larger than it should. I told myself it was just my imagination, but my dog didn't seem to agree. Every time we got near that tree, she'd stop and growl, her fur bristling like she was seeing something I couldn't. Then objects started to move. I'd find toys scattered inside the treehouse, even though my kids hadn't been allowed to play there yet. Tools I'd left on the ground while working on renovations would somehow end up balanced precariously on the treehouse's railing. I brushed it off. Maybe I'd forgotten where I put them, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The night it all came to a head, I was working late in my office, which has a perfect view of the treehouse. The full moon bathed the yard in an eerie glow, and for some reason I couldn't stop staring at the tree. That's when I saw it. The branches were moving, twisting together like they were alive, forming shapes. And then they took the shape of a person, a figure. It stood there, staring directly at my window. I froze. My rational mind told me it was a trick of the light, the wind playing with the leaves. But as I watched, the figure raised an arm, or what looked like an arm, and pointed at me. I don't remember running upstairs to my kids' rooms, but I must have. I grabbed them, bundled them into the car, and drove to a motel without looking back. The next morning, I called a tree removal service and told them to get rid of it, burn it if they had to. I didn't care. They cut it down the same day, and I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. That night, as I lay in the motel bed, I heard it, tapping on the window, slow, deliberate. I didn't dare look. The tapping stopped eventually, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear it, faint and rhythmic, as if it's reminding me that it hasn't really gone away. I bought that house for my family. I thought it would be a place of safety, of happiness, but now all I have are memories of a tree that watched me, and the feeling that it still is. Have you ever heard a phone ring in a place it shouldn't exist? I have, and I promise you, once you do, you'll never forget it. That sound will cling to your soul, a haunting echo of something that should never have been. It all began with a treehouse, a simple wooden structure my friends and I built one long summer when we were kids. It wasn't perfect, but to us it was everything, a fortress, a hideout, a sanctuary. We called it the Tower, and every nail we hammered felt like building a monument to our unbreakable friendship. We spent every day there, climbing its creaky ladder, swapping stories and making promises to never grow apart. But time is a thief, isn't it? It stole our youth, scattered us across different cities, and turned the tower into a forgotten relic. At least that's what I thought, until I got the invitation. It was a message from Kyle, our unofficial ringleader. Let's have a reunion, one last night in the tower. I hesitated, unsure of what ghosts from the past might resurface, but nostalgia is a powerful thing. I packed a bag and headed back to our hometown, eager to see my friends and relive the best days of our lives. The tower was still standing, weathered but stubborn, its planks warped and its once bright paint faded to grey. We joked about how it hadn't collapsed yet, laughing like we were kids again. That night, we sat around a campfire at its base, sharing stories, catching up, and letting the years melt away. Then came the first sign that something was wrong. The phone rang. A loud, shrill ring cutting through the quiet night. We all froze. There wasn't supposed to be a phone in the treehouse. It never had one, and there was no way to install one. It's probably some prank, Kyle said, grinning, but his voice wavered. Curiosity got the better of us. We climbed the ladder one by one until we were inside the tower. In the corner, coated in a thick layer of dust, was a rotary phone. The kind you'd see in old movies. No wires, no explanation, just ringing. Kyle picked it up first, holding it to his ear. His expression changed instantly. Fear replaced his usual bravado. He dropped the phone, backed away, and said, "It knows my name." Before we could question him, the phone rang again. This time, Amy answered. She listened for a moment, her face pale, then whispered, "It's Kyle. He's crying." The fire outside sputtered, almost dying out as we stared at each other in growing terror, and then Kyle disappeared. One moment he was there, pacing near the window. The next he was gone. No sound, no struggle, just gone. We scrambled down the ladder, shouting his name, searching the woods, but there was no trace of him. That's when the phone rang a third time. Amy answered again, her hands trembling. "It's Kyle," she said. "He's saying he's cold." She froze for a moment, her eyes wide with terror, then screamed. The phone fell from her hands, and before we could react, she was gone too. By then, panic had set in. We tried to leave, but the woods felt endless, like they were closing in. The tower loomed behind us, its silhouette sharp against the moonlight, as the phone rang again and again, each ring louder than the last. One by one, my friends vanished, until it was just me. I didn't want to go back, but I had no choice. It felt like something was pulling me, dragging me back to that cursed treehouse. When I climbed inside, the phone sat there, silent now, but the air felt heavy, electric, like it was waiting. And then it rang for the last time. I picked it up, my voice barely a whisper. I said, "Hello?" On the other end, I heard them, my friends, their voices overlapping in a chorus of whispers and screams. "Why did you leave us?" they asked. "Why didn't you save us?" I dropped the phone, ran down the ladder, and didn't stop until I was back in my car. I never went back, but sometimes late at night I hear it, the ringing, faint but insistent, as if calling me back to the tower. And I know deep down that one day I might have to answer. Treehouses. They're meant to be havens of joy, aren't they? A place where imagination runs wild, untouched by the harshness of reality. But what happens when the very thing you built to escape the world becomes the thing you fear most? What happens when the laughter fades and the shadows take over? The stories I've shared tonight aren't just about the strange and the unexplainable. They're about the thin line between innocence and terror. Treehouses are more than just wood and nails. They're vessels for our dreams, our secrets, and sometimes our nightmares. From shadows lurking behind the leaves to whispers in the dark that call your name, these stories remind us that what we can't see is often far more terrifying than what we can. They're warnings, perhaps, to tread carefully when you return to places that once felt safe. So the next time you pass an old treehouse, think about who or what might still be inside. And if you ever hear a faint whisper, or worse, a phone ringing where no phone should be, don't answer it. Treehouses hold memories of childhood wonder, but as these stories have shown, they can also gateways to our darkest fears. Have you ever had a terrifying experience in a treehouse? Or maybe a chilling encounter in a place you thought was safe? I want to hear your story. Leave it in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves a good scare, and subscribe for more haunting tales. And if you dare, turn on the notifications, because the next story might just hit closer to home than you'd ever expect.